This is Android Basics, in which we bring you up to date on the things that you should know to use your Android phone.
Let's now turn on to the Samsung phones, and we're talking about the history of the Samsung UI. And today we'll be focusing on the very first UI of Samsung and where we are today. So looking back when Samsung got started, the first Android phone to ever be put out there by Samsung was the GT i7500. And that thing was announced on April 9th of 2009 and released on June 27, 2009. And it came with, of course, you guessed it, that phone came with the touchviz. That was the first thing that Samsung had. And whether you like it or not, what the touchviz does or did was actually give some character, give some, fun looking stuff, because the first Android UI was just not interesting at all. And so Samsung decided to do a little take on their own and give us that touchviz, which brought a little bit of life, a little bit of different animations and things like that. So that's the first one that we had, was that touchviz. And like I said, we had that back in 2009 with that GT i7500. The second one that continued that was the Galaxy S. Now, after that, there were some items that, Samsung changed. We got a little bit of changes here, because now they focus on something called the nature UX. You guys remember any sound drops, water drops, trees and things like that, if you can see. But the prominent thing, especially on those lock screens, you hear that water drops and things like that. I used to hate that stuff. At first, I thought it was cool. And I remember that debuting with the S3 and all of that. And that's when they started that nature UX. Is there any of you that like those sounds?
I used to enjoy them at first, but then they messed them up, actually. It was terrible. Like the first couple, because I've been using Samsung for a long time. The first releases of these UIs, it was really nice. But then with for instance, the J7, it was terrible. I hated them.
Yeah, it sounds a cool idea. I never had them. I never had Samsung back then, but it sounds kind of cool. Or it sounds like the kind of thing that could be cool or could be really annoying, depending how well it's done.
It was very annoying to me, that water thing. At first, I thought it was really cool. And then I realized I didn't like sounds. So
Look,
here's the reason to this day, I have my sounds off.
The reason they did this, though, it was because the background itself, so the wallpapers were actually water-based. So it used to kind of click to that, like, used to kind of work with that, because you have the water sounds and then the water background. So it was kind of nice for some people, I guess.
Well, I was in a car with some people the other week, and somebody's phone made this sort of noise that sounded like bubbles coming out of a plug hole. Do you think he might have had an older phone?
Probably had a phone that is running touchwiz, because it continued. We got a 2.0, and then I think the time that they dropped it would be in I think maybe 2017. I think that
and when they dropped it, Warren, did it land in the water with a big splash?
I think it probably did. It was a big fish falling into the Nile. But yeah, we continued with that touchwiz. Even the Galaxy S7 series has it. Then we had a little experience going on. There was a beta that came through of the something called the Grace project. That's when we started seeing something called Grace UI that evolved into the Samsung experience. And I think that the Galaxy S8 series dumped the touchviz, and that's when we said goodbye to the touchviz and started with the experience, Samsung Experience.
And
Did
which
any of
one
you get
was
the S8 series?
which one was the one where the experience included exploding phones? Because that was quite a
That would have
sound
been-
effect.
That was before they changed the Samsung Experience.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. You see, I thought.
So I like to think TouchWiz actually went out with a bang because of all the explosions.
Exactly, but here's the interesting thing, though. That Note 7 that was catching on fire was the actual one that started a beta in the fall of that year that was called the Grace, that gave us the Samsung Experience. So bad as that Note 7 was, it came out in August of that year of 2016, and then in the fall they were prepping a beta for it, and that's what transitioned us, to that Grace and into the Samsung Experience.
Do you think they got rid of the water because people were joking about needing the water to put the fires out?
Well, to be honest, there was so much people didn't like about the touchwiz, and I know it was one of the main complaints that folks have, especially when we're back on eyes free on Google. And one of the things that people were complaining about was that touchwiz, there was so much bloatware, as far as some people are concerned. Although I always say, bloatware is in the eye of the beholder. What I think is a bloatware, to me, I don't like it. It would be saving grace on someone else's behalf. So it really doesn't matter what it was, but even Samsung decided it was time to let go of touchwiz, and so we have the Samsung Experience.
So actually, I started my Android journey with Samsung phone. It was the Samsung GTB 5512 phone, and I remember this because that was the first Android phone I ever owned, and that was with the touchwiz. Now, the problem with touchwiz was not bloatware or anything; it was very animated. And that time, this was Android 2.3.6 days. The hardware was not good for all these animations, and people were in fashion with the ROM cleaning and speed boosting and all those apps. So those apps made TouchWiz crash a lot. And I hated it so much that after that, I never even owned a Samsung device, even when they came back on One UI. But I think I should try it once now.
On my Facebook memories this week, it said that 12 years ago, I had my first Android phone, which was a Samsung Galaxy Europa. It wasn't very good, but that was 12 years ago this week. So my first Android phone, even though it wasn't great, was actually a Samsung.
So was the Europa a female name for a pretty European girl? Is that what Samsung was trying to do here?
I've no idea. It was a lot smaller. It was a lot smaller a phone.
A lot of women are a little bit smaller, isn't it?
And it had a joypad at the bottom, but it had a touch screen as well. Slightly strange device.
Well, let's face it, every phone back then in those days was a small phone, right? And a lot of them had that joystick, up and down pad, left, right, and, hit the select, or, it was very interesting, blind friendly, if I may say that. But
yes and no. I mean, there was no. There were a couple of other buttons, but there was no actual keypad, so it was sort of a bit not quite sure what it was.
Oh, yours didn't have a keypad. Okay.
No, so it was a bit meh, to be honest.
So my phone had a keypad. The GTB 5512, it released in 2012 Jan, and that had like a keypad. It had a trackpad, like how your laptop touchpad is, but very small. It had a touch screen, and it also had 3 hardware buttons for the back, home, and the recents. And there was another one. I forgot what that one was, but there were 4 hardware buttons.
Yeah,
so
it was
really
similar.
Yeah,
quite similar, and it had a replaceable battery.
Yeah, that was the best.
Oh yeah, they all did back then.
That was
something we should, we need that back. But no, it was a very slow phone, and I had talkback on it, and I had Spiel on it as well, and I think I quite liked Spiel, but it said on my Facebook post, I hadn't remembered this detail, it was £65, including a £10 phone credit top up on a pay-as-you-go thing. So it was quite a low-end phone, I think.
Visit accessibleandroid.com or download Accessible Android from Google Play Store for text tutorials, tips and tricks, and more to make most out of your Android device.
Those were the days, and frankly, I still have some of those phones lying around here. I got, a couple from Samsung, the Galaxy S and the Galaxy Nexus. Those are the two that I have from Samsung back in those early days.
If anyone wants to remember the bygone days, then you should listen to our episode 1 of the podcast. You will have a lot of surprises then.
Oh, that episode was terrible, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then we shared our Android journeys though, how we got
we
started,
did.
and then I dropped in a surprise from the Marvin shell.
That's right. So that episode 1 has some treasure in there. If you haven't listened to our episode 1 of the BAU podcast, maybe you could take a listen and hear
Although the
Austin
audio
talk
quality
about,
is not good, but it's
yeah,
there.
Austin talking about his experience with that Samsung phone.
You had to have help to install TalkBack. Thank goodness things have moved on.
Exactly. Now, moving on from the Samsung experience, then we got that One UI. And I do want to say that, One UI has been very nice. I particularly like One UI. I sometimes even prefer it over my Pixel experience. You guys, what do you think about One UI? I mean, it has matured and keeps evolving, and a lot of beautiful things happening to the One UI.
I mean, as a person who used the Samsung experience and the touchviz and everything else, I think the UI is the best, probably. I used to love the Samsung experience in the beginning. And then when the One UI came out, I used to not like it. The first version, I think I hated. But then when they came out with One UI 2/3, I think that's when I started to just kind of love how they do it. And then it just started getting better. I think from my experience, I would say the bugs have been really low, and there haven't been things that are critical. What I like the most is how simple it is. It's very simple, yet it actually can, you can do so much work through it. The Samsung experience was nice. I liked it because it was simple. Okay, and then when the One UI came out, it was not as simple, so that's why I hated it. But then they actually knew how to make it kind of sleek and a little bit easier for user to use, and pretty user friendly, whether that was like an advanced user or a little bit more on the beginner aspect of the things.
So the S9, that was still Samsung Experience, was it? Because I never knew what the names.
No, that's the One
It was
UI.
One UI.
That's the One UI. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
One UI came in 2018.
Yeah, I can't really compare then, but I mean, the thing that I liked about Samsung's back then, before TalkBack improved quite a lot, was I liked that you could either use TalkBack or Voice Assistant, which was Samsung's screen reader. And I used to like that because it was, you could mute the speech, which as a Braille reader I really liked, without totally disabling your screen reader. And you could do double tap to play and pause audio and stuff like that. You couldn't do that on other I don't think you could do that on Google phones or like the Nokia ones back then. You can now, but I mean, that's not so much the launcher, but it was part of the Samsung, I want to say experience, but I don't mean experience as in Samsung experience. It was part of the Samsung user experience, I suppose. as opposed to the Nokia one or whatever. I did like that you could choose, have a choice between screen readers. So if one thing worked well on one screen reader, it was great. But if it didn't, you could swap over. And we have lost that. We've lost something with that.
Honestly, my relationship with voice assistant ended when I just ended setting up my phone. Okay, when I finished setting up my phone. Back then when it was around. But I used to love having the second screen reader, and the idea of the multi-finger gestures that was there before, that Google obviously has applied right now in TalkBack. I think it was pretty nice.
Yeah.
But the only thing that I didn't like, though, was the fact that Samsung was kind of a little bit slower when it comes to updating the screen reader itself. So
Well,
it
they
was kind
still
of
are.
They still are, yeah, apparently. But I mean, back then, TalkBack was getting more updates than Voice Assistant
Yeah.
was at that point. So it kind of made me mad because obviously TalkBack was getting more features and getting more interest. While on the other hand, Voice Assistant was not. So
No, but we could update TalkBack. Now we can't update TalkBack if we've got a Samsung phone.
Yes,
because we can't choose between the Samsung version and the Google version, and that's sort of annoying.
I mean, you can, but it's a bit tricky. But like, you're right. But before you could actually use both, but right now it's just a little bit tricky.
Yeah, but even if you put the Google one on, you can only have one, can't you? You can't have two versions on the same phone, can you?
I'm
you
not
can
sure.
I switch back and forth between them.
Do you?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Okay, I didn't know that. I learned something today.
But I think that so if you installed both TalkBacks, one would be like in the main screen of the your accessibility, and the Google TalkBack is going to be located in the services.
Yeah.
As if you had another screen.
You could only ever run one at a time, of course, which is sensible. I mean, otherwise it would be you'd have like twin speech telling you two things at once. That'd just be really annoying.
No, it happens sometimes if you have TalkBack on and commentary on. But now that you mentioned screen readers and accessibility list, I was actually setting up my sister's new phone, which is an A73 phone. And I just remembered, you remember those days when you used to hit the side key for you to get the accessibility menu? It was just kind of, I remembered this yesterday, and I was like, wow, we've come a long way since then. This side key menu used to have the restart and then the power off and the accessibility menu. I think this was the only way for you to get to it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so that is our look there at the Samsung history, that the One UI is now what we have. But so Samsung goes back, years ago when they got started with their first Android device. And look at where we are today, talking about One UI, things we like about it and how simplified things have become because of One UI. Like I said, I personally like One UI.